Hello and welcome to the trial of OJ Simpson, Part 2. On the evening of June 12, 1994, Brown and Simpson both attended their daughter Sydney's dance recital at Paul Revere Middle School. Afterwards, Brown and her family went to eat at Mezzaluna Restaurant. They did not invite Simpson to join them. One of the waiters at the restaurant was Ron Goldman, who had become close friends with Brown in recent weeks, but was not assigned to the Brown family's table. Brown and her children then went to Ben & Jerry's before returning to Brown's condominium in Bundy Drive, Brentwood. The manager of Mezzaluna recounted that Brown's mother telephoned the restaurant at 9:37 p.m. about a pair of lost eyeglasses. The manager found the glasses and put them in a white envelope, which Goldman took with him as he left the restaurant at the end of his shift at 9:50 p.m., intending to drop it off at Brown's place. Meanwhile, Simpson ate takeout food from McDonald's with Cato Kalin, a bit-part actor and family friend who had been given the use of a guest house on Simpson's estate. Rumors circulated that Simpson had been on drugs at the time of the murder, and the New York Post's Cindy Adams reported that the pair had actually gone to a local Burger King, where a prominent drug dealer, known only as JR, had admitted to selling them crystal meth. Brown's neighbors testified that they heard profuse barking coming from outside throughout the night, beginning around 10:15 p.m. Around 10:55 p.m., a dog walker who lived a few blocks away from Brown came across Brown's Akita dog barking in the street outside her home. The Akita, whose legs were covered in blood, followed the man home. He tried to walk the dog back to where he found it, but the dog resisted. Later on, he left the Akita with a neighboring couple who offered to keep the dog overnight. As the dog was agitated, the couple decided to walk it back to where it had been found. Around midnight, as they reached the area where the Akita had been found, the dog stopped outside Brown's home, and the couple saw Brown's body lying outside the house. Police called to the scene found Goldman's body near Brown's. The front door to Brown's condominium was open when the bodies were found, but there were no signs that anyone had entered the building by breaking in or otherwise. Brown's body was lying face down and barefoot at the bottom of the stairs leading to the door. The walkway leading to the stairs was covered in blood, but the soles of Brown's feet were clean. Based on this evidence, investigators concluded that she was the first person to be killed and the intended target. She had been stabbed multiple times in the head and neck, but there were few defensive wounds on her hands, implying a short struggle to investigators. The final wound inflicted ran deep into her neck, severing her carotid artery. A large bruise in the center of her upper back with a corresponding footprint on her clothing indicated to investigators that, after killing Goldman, the assailant returned to Brown's body, stood on her back, pulled her head back by the hair, and slit her throat. Her larynx could be seen through the gaping wound in her neck, and vertebra C3 was incised. Brown's head barely remained attached to her body. Goldman's body lay nearby, close to a tree and the fence. He had been stabbed multiple times in the body and neck, but there were relatively few defensive wounds on his hands, signifying a short struggle to investigators. Forensic evidence from the Los Angeles County coroner alleged that the assailant stabbed Goldman with one hand while holding him in a chokehold. Near Goldman's body were a blue knit cap, a left-hand extra-large Eris isotoner light leather glove, and the envelope containing the glasses that he was returning. Detectives determined that Goldman came to Nicole's house during her killing and that the killer killed him to silence Goldman and remove any witnesses. A trail of the assailant's bloody shoe prints ran through the back gate. To the left of some of the prints were drops of blood from the assailant, who was apparently bleeding from the left hand. Measuring the distance between the prints indicated that the assailant walked rather than ran away from the scene. Flight to Chicago. On the night of June 12th, Simpson was scheduled to board a red-eye flight from Los Angeles International Airport to Chicago, where he was due to play golf the following day at a convention with representatives of Hertz Rental Car Corporation, for whom he was a spokesman. The flight was due to leave at 11:45 p.m., and a limousine arrived early at Simpson's Rockingham estate to pick him up at around 10:25 p.m. The limousine driver drove around the estate to make sure he could navigate the area with the stretch limousine properly and to see which driveway would have the best access for the limousine. He began to buzz the intercom at 10:40, getting no response. He noted the house was dark and nobody appeared to be home as he smoked a cigarette and made several calls to his boss to get Simpson's home number. He testified that at one point he saw a figure the same size as Simpson enter the house through the front door from where the driveway starts, before the lights came on. He did not see what direction the figure came from. He testified that he saw Simpson's house number on the curb outside the estate, but no car was parked outside. The prosecution presented exhibits showing the position next to the house number on the curb in which Simpson's Ford Bronco was found the next morning, implying that the limousine driver would surely have noticed the Bronco if it had been there when he arrived to pick Simpson up. Around the time the limousine driver witnessed this shadowy figure head towards the south walkway where the bloody glove would later be found, Cato Kalin was having a telephone conversation with a friend. At approximately 10:40, something crashed into the wall of the guest house Kalin was staying in, which he described as 3 thumps, and which he feared was an earthquake. Kalin hung up the phone and ventured outside to investigate the noises, but did not go directly down the dark south pathway from which the thumps had originated. Instead, he walked to the front of the property, where he saw the limousine parked outside. Kalin let the limousine in, and Simpson finally came out through the front door a few minutes later, claiming he had overslept. Both the limousine driver and Kalin would later testify that Simpson seemed agitated that night. The limousine driver noted that on the way to the airport, Simpson complained about how hot it was and was sweating and rolled down the window despite it not being a warm night. The driver also testified that he loaded 4 luggage bags into the car that night, one of them being a knapsack that Simpson would not let him touch, insisting he load it himself. A porter at the airport testified that Simpson only checked 3 bags that night, and the police determined that the missing luggage was the same knapsack the limousine driver had mentioned earlier. Another witness not heard at the trial claimed he saw Simpson at the airport discarding items from a bag into a trash can. Detectives Tom Ling and Philip Van Adder believe this is how the murder weapon, shoes, and clothes that Simpson wore during the murder were disposed. Simpson was running late but caught his flight. A passenger on the plane and the pilot testified to not noticing any cuts or wounds on Simpson's hands. A broken glass, a note with a telephone number on it, and bed sheets with blood on them were all recovered from Simpson's room at the O'Hare Plaza Hotel. The manager of the hotel recalled Simpson asking for a Band-Aid for his finger at the front desk because he had cut it on pieces of notepaper. Prosecution case. The 2 lead prosecutors were Deputy District Attorneys Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. Clark was designated as the lead prosecutor, and Darden became Clark's co-counsel. Prosecutors Hank Goldberg and William Hodgman, who have successfully prosecuted high-profile cases in the past, assisted Clark and Darden. 2 prosecutors who were DNA experts, Rockne Harmon and George Woody Clark, were brought in to present the DNA evidence in the case and were assisted by prosecutor Lisa Kahn. Theory. The prosecution argued that the domestic violence within the Simpson-Brown marriage culminated in her murder. Simpson's history of abusing Brown resulted in their divorce and him pleading guilty to 1 count of domestic violence in 1989. On the night of the murders, Simpson attended a dance recital for his daughter and was reportedly angry with Brown because of a black dress that she wore, which he said was tight. Simpson's then-girlfriend, Paula Barbieri, wanted to attend the recital with Simpson, but he did not invite her. After the recital, Simpson returned home to a voicemail from Barbieri ending their relationship. According to the prosecution, Simpson then drove over to Brown's home in his Ford Bronco to reconcile their relationship as a result. And when Brown refused, Simpson killed her in a final act of control. Goldman then came upon the scene to return some eyeglasses and was murdered as well in order to silence him and remove any witnesses. Afterwards, the prosecution said that Simpson walked to his Bronco and drove home, where he parked it and walked into his house. There, he took off his blood-stained clothes, put them in the knapsack, except his socks and the glove, put clean ones on, and left towards the limousine. At the airport, prosecution said that Simpson opened the knapsack, removed the clothes, Bruno Magli's shoes, and the murder weapon, and threw them in the trash before putting the knapsack in one of his suitcases and headed towards his flight. Domestic violence. The prosecution opened its case by calling LAPD 911 dispatcher Sharon Gilbert and playing a 4-minute 911 call from Brown on January 1st, 1989, in which she expressed fear that Simpson would physically harm her, and Simpson himself is even heard in the background yelling at her and possibly hitting her as well. The officer who responded to that call, Detective John Edwards, testified next that when he arrived, a severely beaten Brown ran from the bushes where she was hiding and to the detective screaming, "He's going to kill me, he's going to kill me," referring to Simpson. Pictures of Brown's face from that night were then shown to the jury to confirm his testimony. That incident led to Simpson's arrest and eventual pleading of no contest to 1 count of domestic violence, for which he received probation for 1 year. LAPD officer and longtime friend of both Simpson and Brown, Ron Shipp, testified on February 1st, 1995, that Simpson told him the day after the murders that he did not want to take a polygraph test offered to him by the police because I've had a lot of dreams about killing her. I really don't know about taking that thing. The jury dismissed Shipp's claims after defense attorney Carl E. Douglas accused him of being an alcoholic who was testifying against Simpson because he wanted to promote his acting career. The prosecution then called Brown's sister to the witness stand. She tearfully testified to many episodes of domestic violence in the 1980s when she saw Simpson pick up his wife and hurl her against a wall, then physically throw her out of their house during an argument. She also testified that Simpson was agitated with Brown the night of their daughter's dance recital as well, the same night Brown was murdered. Although a home videotape taken immediately after the dance recital showed a cheerful Simpson being given a kiss by Brown's sister, Cato Kalin corroborated Brown's sister's claim that Simpson was upset with Brown because of the black dress she wore, which he said was tight. The prosecution planned to present 62 separate incidents of domestic violence, including 3 previously unknown incidents Brown had documented in several letters she had written and placed in a bank safety deposit box. Judge Ito denied the defense's motion to suppress the incidents of domestic violence, but only allowed witnessed accounts to be presented to the jury because of Simpson's Sixth Amendment rights. The letters Brown had written and the statements she made to friends and family were ruled inadmissible as hearsay because Brown was dead and unable to be cross-examined. Despite this, the prosecution had witnesses for 44 separate incidents they planned to present to the jury. However, the prosecution dropped the domestic violence portion of their case on June 20th, 1995. Marcia Clark stated it was because they believed the DNA evidence against Simpson was insurmountable, but the media speculated it was because of the comments made by dismissed juror Jeanette Harris. Christopher Darden later confirmed that to be true. Harris was dismissed on April 6th because she failed to disclose that she was a victim of domestic violence from her ex-husband. But afterwards, Harris gave an interview and called the evidence of Simpson's abuse of Brown a whole lot of nothing, and also said, that doesn't mean he is guilty of murder. This dismissal of Simpson's abusive behavior from a female juror, who was also a victim of such abuse by her own husband, convinced the prosecution that the jury was not receptive to the domestic violence argument. After the verdict, the jurors called the domestic violence portion of the case a waste of time. Shapiro, Dershowitz, and Ullman later admitted they believed that race played a factor in the jurors' dismissal of Brown's abuse by Simpson. The defense retained renowned advocate for victims of domestic abuse, Dr. Lenore E. Walker. Cochran said that she would testify that Simpson doesn't fit the profile of an abuser that would murder his spouse. Dr. Walker's colleagues were appalled by her decision to defend Simpson and accused her of betraying her advocacy for a $250,000 retainer. Dr. Walker was dropped from the witness list for tactical reasons after she submitted her report on the case. In it, she opines that the statistic from Dershowitz that of the 2 million incidents of abuse per year, only 2,000 victims are actually murdered by their spouses as being misleading because Brown was already dead. The relevant statistic was, of the murdered spouses who were also victims of abuse, what percentage of them were murdered by their current or ex-husband? When she reported that number was 80.3%, they dropped her from the witness list. The revelation of Simpson's abuse of Brown is credited with turning public opinion against him. The public shock at the reason why Dr. Walker was dropped from the defense witness list is credited with transforming public opinion on spousal abuse from a private familial matter to a serious public health issue. Timeline. Los Angeles County Chief Medical Examiner Dr. Lakshmanan Satyavajaswaran testified on June 14, 1995, that Brown's time of death was estimated as between 10 p.m. and 10:30 p.m. Cato Kalin testified on March 22, 1995, that he last saw Simpson at 9:36 p.m. that evening. Simpson was not seen again until 10:54 p.m. when he answered the intercom at the front door for the limousine driver, Alan Park. Simpson had no alibi for approximately 1 hour and 18 minutes, during which time the murders took place. Alan Park testified on March 28, 1995, that he arrived at Simpson's home at 10:25 p.m. on the night of the murders and stopped at the Rockingham entrance. Simpson's Bronco was not there. He then drove over to the Ashford entrance and rang the intercom 3 times, getting no answer, starting at 10:40 p.m. At approximately 10:50 p.m., he saw a tall African-American shadowy figure resembling Simpson approach the front door before aborting towards the southern walkway that leads to Kaylin's bungalow. Park's testimony was significant because it explained the location of the glove found at Simpson's home. The blood trail from the Bronco to the front door was easily understood, but the glove was found on the other side of the house. Park said the shadowy figure initially approached the front door before heading down the southern walkway, which leads to where the glove was found by Furman. The prosecution believed that Simpson had driven his Bronco to and from Brown's home to commit the murders, saw that Park was there, and aborted his attempt to enter through the front door and tried to enter through the back instead. He panicked and made the sounds that Kaylin heard when he realized that the security system would not let him enter through the rear entrance. He then discarded the glove, came back, and went through the front door. During cross-examination, Park conceded that he could not identify the figure, but said he saw that person enter the front door, and afterwards Simpson answered and said he was home alone. Park conceded that he did not notice any cuts on Simpson's left hand, but added, "I shook his right hand, not his left." DNA evidence and blood trail. The prosecution presented a total of 108 exhibits, including 61 drops of blood, of DNA evidence allegedly linking Simpson to the murders. With no witnesses to the crime, the prosecution was dependent on DNA as the only physical evidence linking Simpson to the crime. The volume of DNA evidence in this case was unique, and the prosecution believed that they could reconstruct how the crime was committed with enough accuracy to resemble an eyewitness account. Marcia Clark stated in her opening statements that there was a trail of blood from the Bundy crime scene through Simpson's Ford Bronco to his bedroom at Rockingham. Simpson's DNA found on blood drops next to the bloody footprints near the victims at the Bundy crime scene. Probability of error was 1 in 9.7 billion. Simpson's DNA found on a trail of blood drops leading away from the victims towards and on the back gate at Bundy. Probability of error was 1 in 200. Simpson, Goldman, and Brown's DNA found on blood on the outside of the door and inside Simpson's Bronco. Probability of error was 1 in 21 billion. Simpson's DNA found on blood drops leading from the area where his Bronco was parked at Simpson's Rockingham home to the front door entrance. Simpson, Brown, and Goldman's DNA on a bloody glove found behind his home. Simpson and Brown's DNA found on blood on a pair of socks in Simpson's bedroom. Probability of error was 1 in 6.8 billion. Hair and fiber evidence. LAPD criminalist and hair fiber expert Susan Brockbank testified on June 27, 1995, and FBI special agent and fiber expert Doug Diedrich testified on June 29, 1995, to the following findings. The fibers from the glove found at Simpson's home microscopically matched the one found at the crime scene, proving they were each other's mate. Both of the victims, the two gloves, and the blue knit cap worn by the killer had hair consistent with Simpson. The hair in the blue knit cap worn by the killer was embedded in the seams, indicating it was there from being worn repeatedly. Dark blue cotton clothing fibers were found on both victims. The video from the dance recital that Simpson attended earlier that night shows him wearing a similarly colored shirt. Kato Kaelin testified that Simpson was still wearing that shirt when they got home from McDonald's, but not anymore when he answered the door for the limousine driver. The police searched his home, but the shirt was never found. Hair consistent with Goldman was found on Brown, and clothing fibers consistent with Brown was found on Goldman. This supported the prosecution's theory that the assailant killed Brown first, then Goldman, and afterwards returned to Brown to cut her throat. The hair consistent with Brown that was found on the Rockingham glove was torn, which also supports the prosecution claim that the killer grabbed Brown by her hair to cut her throat. Fibers that were only used in the 1993-1994 model year Ford Bronco, the same car that Simpson owns, were found on both victims, the knit cap, and on both gloves. The glove found at Simpson's home that belonged to the murderer had hair and clothing fibers consistent with Simpson, Brown, and Goldman, as well as fibers from a 1993-1994 Ford Bronco and Brown's Akita dog. Shoe print analysis. On June 19th, FBI shoe print expert William J. Bodziak testified that the bloody shoe prints found at the crime scene and inside Simpson's Bronco were made from a rare and expensive pair of Bruno Magli Italian shoes. He determined the shoes were a size 12, the same size that Simpson wore, and are only sold at Bloomingdale's. Only 29 pairs of that size were sold in the U.S., and one of them was sold at the same store that Simpson often buys his shoes from. Bodziak also testified that, despite 2 sets of footprints at the crime scene, only one attacker was present because they were all made by the same shoes. During cross-examination, Bailey suggested the murderer deliberately wore shoes that were the wrong size, which Bodziak dismissed as ridiculous. Simpson denied ever owning a pair of those ugly-ass shoes, and there was only circumstantial evidence he did. Bloomingdale's employee Samuel Poser testified he remembered showing Simpson those shoes, but there was no store record of him purchasing them. Although the prosecution could not prove that Simpson owned a pair of those shoes, Bodziak testified that a similar bloody shoe print was left on the floor inside Simpson's Bronco. Scheck suggested that Furman broke into the Bronco and left the footprint there. He produced a photo of Furman walking through a puddle of blood. Bodziak admitted that he was not able to confirm that the shoe print in the car definitely came from a Bruno Magli shoe, but dismissed Scheck's claim because none of the shoe prints at the crime scene were made by Furman's shoes, making it unlikely he could have made a bloody shoe print in the Bronco.